When did you first start sailing? How did that start?
It started when I was a teenager. I used to go visit my grandfather in Florida, and he had a little day sailboat that he would take us out on. Showed me how to raise a sail and hold a tiller, and we would go to these little islands and camp out for the night. And then he gave me a copy of Duff, which is a book that has inspired a lot of cruisers. The first boy to sail around the world
I'm reading it.
single-handedly when he was 16. And that sort of planted the seed in my head of just this dream of one day sail around the world. And then, life just took many different turns for me, and it was sort of one of these dreams that I had jotted down on a list of things to do, and I had already kind of like scratched it out because I was a single mom with 2 kids, having to provide for my family, and it was one of these things that I thought that would never happen in my life. And here I am. I met Jay, who's a sailor, and then I had to write that back down on the list, and here I am living it, So it's really amazing how life will take these turns, and yeah.
How did you meet Jay?
Well, I was living in the North Pacific of my country, Costa Rica, Central America. I had my own little production company and my 2 daughters, Sol and Luna. I had it made. I had a great life. I was raising my daughters in the country that I grew up in. I sort of left the pinnacle of my professional career in New York, teaching at NYU's film school and acting in movies and making movies and things like this. I lived there for the first year with Sol, and then I decided that I didn't want to raise my kids in New York City, and I just wanted to go back to my roots and go back to my country, so I did that. I had a great life living on the beach with my own little production company, doing videos and photography and weddings and real estate stuff, whatever fell on my lap, whatever could bring bread to the table. And I was making it just fine, just great, and having a great life. And I thought that was it. I thought that would be my life for the next 20 years, until the children were on their own and left the nest. And then, I would do something else. I was only there because of them, because that was what was best for them. And then, here came the sailor washed up on the shores of Tamarindo, Costa Rica, on his dinkety boat, on his wooden boat that was falling apart, just rotting away in the rain of Costa Rica, and he had no shoes, and we sort of just fell in love, and I was definitely, ready to just jump aboard and become permanent stowaways. When we met, he was on his way back up to California. He had been in Latin America for a few years, and he needed to get back and see family and wanted to fix up the boat. So he did that. He went on this massive voyage for 55 days at sea on his own, and he taught me how to look at the weather online, and I became his weather person. So he would call every 3 days, and I would go online and check the weather. He had a satellite phone, and I would tell him what the weather was like, and we sort of had this relationship going like this. And then when he arrived in California, it was the rainy season in Costa Rica, and I really didn't have much work during that time. So we decided that we would go up and live on his boat with him for those 2 months and see what it was like. We were living on Carisalia, was the name of his wooden boat, his Formosa, in the harbor of San Diego. Beautiful. And I fell in love with the lifestyle. We fell in love. The girls fell in love with him. We were like, yeah, let's do this. So I flew back home and started the season working. I had a lot of weddings and things lined up. And Jay sailed the boat back down because we were going to live on the boat. And then we had the opportunity to go and rescue messenger. So we sold Carisalia in Costa Rica, and I sold everything I owned. And we packed our bags just with the bare minimum and flew to Florida and started living on messenger right away and fixing it up as we lived in it and sailed around the Caribbean and, extended our family, had one baby in Martinique and now the other one in Iceland. So it's been a wild ride. I had Sol and Luna with a sperm donor. I sort of was ready to be a mother and didn't have a significant other in my life. Basically, I had them on my own. And and then Jay, has adopted them and has raised them and provided for them. So it's been an interesting family in the making.
Yeah, international family.
Yeah. Everybody's been born in a different place. Like I said, Sol was born, 10 years ago in New York. And then Luna, my 8-year-old, was born in Costa Rica. And then Caribe, the 3-year-old, was born on board right here on Messenger, right here.
Wow.
In Martinique. And Artico was born in a little old house in Ísafjörður in Iceland, in the West Fjords, near the Arctic Circle. So his name is Artico, which means Arctic in Spanish. So they all have a Spanish meaning that means something. So Sol means sun, Luna is moon, Caribe is the Caribbean Sea, and Artico, Arctic. Finally, our little boy, which means that we can close the factory, as they say.
Did you find a midwife to help? Or?
No, my births have been sort of like a natural progression. So my first Sol was with midwives in New York City at a natural birthing center. So it was a natural birth, but sort of like at an institution made special for this. And then Luna was a home birth with a midwife in my country in Costa Rica. And then by the time I was going to have Caribe, my third child, I told Jay, I know what I'm doing. And he's sort of the type of person that has felt that this is just very natural, for women to give birth. And he was like, yeah, why would we need a midwife? We can just do this on our own, no problem. So we decided to have her in our home, which is Messenger, our boat. And we were in a huge marina in Martinique. We picked a French country because we sort of knew that they're so laissez-faire with everything that they were going to be like, no problem. And sure enough, it was like that. It was like, yeah, we're going to give birth on the boat. And okay, no problem. Just, come, 2 days later with your passports and and we'll give you a birth certificate. And like nobody at the marina or any of our neighbors in boats, like nobody, was like, shocked or anything about it, it was just very normal, and it was a beautiful birth, and of course we were 20 minutes from a hospital, in case any emergencies, because you never know, but there's plenty of time in a birth, if there's a complication, to get somewhere to get help. And so then Artico, so then, we came up to northern latitudes, and it was just sort of like colder and crammed quarters. Like in the Caribbean with Caribe, we had a tent up and we had the warm weather, and the boat just felt much bigger, So I felt like I had enough space and comfort to give birth on board. But then, with Artico, I sort of didn't want to give birth on the boat. It was cold. It was March in Iceland. We just sort of like met some wonderful people that sort of took us in the West Fjords, and had a little old house that used to belong to the great grandmother of the family, who had passed away about 4 years ago. And her house was just sort of like left intact since she passed. And they offered for us to stay there. And then we just sort of felt like this is where he's meant to be born. And we asked the owner if we could give birth in there. And she felt very honored. And she was like, yes, of course. She grew up there. And that's where he was born. So, yeah. Yeah, he was the 26th child to be born in this house. And the last one was in 1944. So in 2015, he was the 26th child. So the house sort of had this vibe, this presence, So it was really beautiful. It was just right after a winter storm, so there was snow up to the windows, and it was like this winter wonderland, and it was very special, yeah.
Arctico has Icelandic citizenship? Or?
No, I mean, every country has sort of different rules with citizenship. All of my children can have American citizenship because both Jay and I are American, and then they can have Costa Rican citizenship because I'm Costa Rican. So it doesn't matter where they're born, they get that through me. You get a birth certificate of birth abroad, which 3 of my kids have. And then through that, then you get the citizenship just because both of your parents are citizens. So, yeah.
Wow. How do you handle education for your children?
We're sort of what you would term in the normal world unschoolers.
Unschoolers.
Unschoolers, yeah. It's sort of a term that started in the 1930s by John Holt, which was an educator. He was actually the father of homeschooling. So, yeah, he was an educator that started homeschooling, and then he went beyond that and said, well, like, wait a minute, homeschooling is just taking children out of the institution of a school and giving them schooling at home. So then they don't have other kids to play with. And that didn't seem right to him either. So then he went further to be like, you know what? Life is the lesson. Children learn better and learn more when they're just living life, I think it would be very hard for me to unschool if I had a normal traditional life. Like if I lived in a house with a society in a village, in a community, it would be too hard, I think. But because of the lifestyle, this nomadic lifestyle that we have, it definitely works out great, because really life is the lesson. They learn so much through their experiences, different languages, different cultures. They're always doing things. Whenever we've stopped long enough in different places, they've gone to school. We actually picked a French country to stop and have Caribe's birth because Sol and Luna, most of the children that they were meeting, sailing around, were French. Because the French are the ones that mostly sail with their children. The parents would speak either Spanish or English, so Jay and I could communicate with the adults, but then the children, for the most part, spoke only French, and so the girls were frustrated because they spoke Spanish and English, and they wanted to learn French, and they were like, we want to learn French. It's like, okay, let's pick a French country where we can go, and they can learn French. So we picked Martinique in the Caribbean, and we went there, and they went to school there. Public French school, 3 months, total immersion. They were speaking French with French kids on the ponton, on the docks, And then when we stopped in the U.S. to do a refit on Messenger, they went to school there, American public school, for 6 months. And then they had the opportunity to go again after the summer when school started again, and they were sort of like, no. They didn't like the educational system that much there, so
it wasn't fun.
No.
They wanted to stay home. So I did homeschooling during that second winter that we were in the U.S. It sort of worked out good because there were other children in the same marina that were also homeschooled, so they had kids to play with and everything. Because the social part is what's so great about schools, The social part is what's important for us. And then when we came up to Iceland, there was no other boats, no other communities with children living on board that they could play with, so they wouldn't get that social part. So then we went to the school, and it was amazing. I mean, the educational system of Iceland was incredible because it was so much more, on par to the sort of education that we believe in, which is this hands-on learning things by doing, not by what you learn in a book, So in Iceland, the education is not highly academic. It's more hands-on. So they have classes like knitting, carpentry, chess, how to play chess.
We learned to
once
play
a
chess
week. They have
for the
chess.
first time.
They have things like health and community and sports, So every time that they do
Swimming.
sports, they take a shower. So it's all about like hygiene and cooking, like real life things, how to behave in a community. So I was really blown away from the education in Iceland. It was definitely their favorite.
Yeah, it was really fun, but also we learn a lot from our dad, like doing homeschool. Like we don't usually write in a book. We sometimes we fish, and then when my dad cuts the fish to get the good stuff out, he shows us all the things, the parts of the fish, where's the belly, what do they eat, and things like that.
Wow.
And we sometimes write it in the book. So
Wow.
it's pretty good.
So instead of learning like, you know, biology from a book, they learn it in real life because they're looking at what a heart looks like, what does it work for, what is the liver for, what are the kidneys,
Yeah.
you know,
I always thought that hearts were shaped like that. But,
like a heart.
yeah, but they're not.
No.
I found out they're this thing.
You saw that from a fish that
Yeah.
you caught. Wow.
So we basically turned every experience, every life experience into a learning experience. When you're out like living real life, you know, especially if you're a child, you just have all these questions that even as an adult you can't even answer them. You have to go look them up, you know?
Yeah, in American schools and other schools,
Yes.
but not in Iceland, there you have to, you can't ask questions that much. You can't ask questions. They don't let you. You have to do what they're told. And I didn't like that. They just do
You know,
that.
the part they didn't like about their experience in public school in the U.S. is that all they did was sit there and write the same thing over and over. And, you know, they were like, we got it. One time we got it. You know, it's like, it's sad because education really was created in the Industrial Revolution to create factory workers. You know, they needed to read and write, so they created schools, you know, whereas before that, before the Industrial Revolution, it's like children just became what their fathers were. If your father was a blacksmith, you would probably be a blacksmith, you know, things like this, you know, or farming, like you just learned by living, you know, whatever your parents did. And then factories came along, and then schools, you know, came along, and then schools haven't like evolved with time, you know, they haven't changed, you know. Some have, like Waldorf, and some schools are just more innovative and things like this. But for the most part, the majority of schools are still creating little robots. And so I'm just really excited that, you know, my kids are able to, you know, just grow up differently, you know, and that their little fires don't have to be like turned out, you know, through the educational system, you know. So we're really teaching them the things that are important. I mean, we meet so many children that come out of college with an education, you know, and they don't know how to budget their money. They end up with credit cards, you know, and huge debts, you know, debts from school and debts from just not knowing how to manage their money. And we have no worries about them. They already make their own money. They already make their own things and sell them.
We still do things like wash the dishes, help out around the house. We don't always let them do all the work, and we just play and find out things. Like I washed the dishes when you were filming Jay.
Yes.
Like things like that. We help people. Yeah, I'm gonna show you something.
Did you make that?
Yeah, we made it.
How did you learn to make something like that?
Well, we just make things like we paint rocks with little figures like boats, and we sell them.
We went to yard sales, and at this one yard sale for like $5, we got a huge box full of these like sample pieces of leather, all different colors. And we've made so many things out of this. Jay used them to make mittens. So he's knitted mittens and then made covers for the mittens out of leather.
The knitting thing keeps it warm, but this doesn't.
Right.
Just blocks the
That
wind.
blocks the wind. Beautiful. Look at the sewing. That's beautiful.
We've used the same leather for the spreaders to protect the sails and the spreaders, and around the chain plates
Something like
here.
this, we make these things, and then just put it in here.
Very warm and windproof and beautiful.
Another bags for sale, handmade by kids.
So Jay has taught him, you know, that they've made like their own P&L report. So then they have to take money out of what they've made to buy things, to make more things, and this sort of thing, you know, like really teaching them. They also learned Icelandic in Iceland because they went to school for about, I don't know, 6 months or something like this. And yeah, it's probably a language that they won't use or that maybe they'll forget, but they're learning how to learn languages. So they pick up languages like this. It's incredible. You know, the larynx is a muscle. And this is why when you learn a language later in life, you have an accent.
Yes.
Because that muscle has stiffened, you know, to the languages that you've learned. And like them, whenever they speak a language, it's like they don't have an accent.
Right, they get the pronunciation right away.
Yeah, it's incredible.
What about healthcare?
It's just never been a concern, you know. This is just sort of like another thing that society sort of ingrains in people's minds that you need and need to prepare for and need to, you know, I guess we've just been fortunate, and also just I think our lifestyle, you know, makes us just be very healthy. We just hope that nothing ever happens. I do homeopathy, you know, for like just colds and bacteria, stomach things like this. I have tinctures of homeopathy that I buy and sort of keep along the way. We just eat very healthy, not really a lot of packaged foods, just everything sort of like homemade from scratch. We've always just sort of adapted to whatever is eaten in the place that we're at, you know, like we're not picky eaters, and our children haven't developed into picky eaters. Whatever they eat is what we end up eating, you know, so our diets are constantly changing. We're just constantly adapting to wherever we are. Yeah, just don't have health care or, you know, yeah.
Yeah. The things that we eat are really yummy. Like in Iceland, we ate whatever they ate. We ate puffin. We tried puffin. We tried whale meat. We tried cod liver.
Wow.
Fish for cod. And
Ate
here,
a lot of lamb.
Yeah, and here we're eating. These people brought us some
Fulmar,
and
the bird,
a bird and
Really?
and
some whale
yeah,
meat
just people that
and
we met
whale
yesterday
peas.
just brought us some.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
took us to the showers.
We're always trying new things. In Newfoundland, we tried moose and
Yeah.
seal.
Oh, moose
just-
hamburgers
in
are so
Cuba,
good.
Hamburgers.
Yeah,
Cuba,
they're
we had a
really good.
shark, and we're just always trying whatever.
Yeah.
What are your plans from here? Now you're in the Faroe Islands. What do you think the next years will be like?